And Jesus himself stood among them, and he said to them, "Peace be with you." Please be seated. It might be a bit hard to tell just by looking at me, but I've never been much of an accomplished athlete. I know you think sprinter, long jump. No, none of that. Which isn't, really, I guess, the worst thing ever. The problem is I'm fairly competitive, which doesn't pair well with not being the least bit athletically competitive. And what this added up to is I didn't play much when I was a kid, active sports and those sorts of things, which I actually now regret. But I didn't do it because I knew I likely wouldn't win, and so that made me not want to play. And when I did play, I oftentimes did not win. Well, I did rack up a lot of what they call moral victories. I'm a gold medalist in the moral victory category. Someone once asked, "What's a moral victory?" Another answered, "That's what a coach tells you when you lose." Moral victories. It's like celebrating getting an almost, just try a little harder next time, or going out on an anniversary with your, I think we should just be friends, girlfriend, by grabbing a couple of near beers. It's all very close, but no cigar, because it's moral victories. Now, 2 weeks ago was Easter. The church was utterly full. We had to put chairs on the sides to squeeze everyone in. We thought we might have to move St. John's over to the Berglund Center. And as I do each and every Sunday, I kind of walked around all day like a peacock. And this always lasts every year exactly 1 week, until I get to see the attendance numbers for the next Sunday, the second Sunday of Easter. And then it's just kind of back to reality, realizing that Easter sermon that you were just sure was going to bring them back in droves, didn't. It's just normal reality, with the threat that Easter Sunday victory might have actually been more of a moral victory. Now, the second Sunday of Easter, last Sunday, is known throughout the church as Low Sunday for this very reason. I might want to call it Reality Sunday. Another way that it's known is Thomas Sunday, because doubting Thomas always shows up on the second Sunday in Easter, which is really quite funny if you think about it, because it's like we put all of our belief and our faith up front when everybody's here on Easter Sunday, and then save all of our doubts for the next week when no one else is around. Now, let me just say up front, Thomas just had bad luck. He had the bad luck of missing Jesus' first visitation with the other disciples. And because poor Thomas wasn't there for that event and found all that they were saying quite hard to believe, he got stuck with that title, Doubting Thomas. And yet I think Doubting Thomas should better be called Realistic Thomas. For Thomas was the sort of guy who wouldn't allow for any moral victories. Thomas demanded that he was going to contend with the truth. And what Thomas knew is the truth that death is final. And thus there was no good way to go around spinning what happened to Jesus. Perhaps that's why I've always been rather thankful for Thomas's witness. I'm glad that he shows up in the Easter season. Because in my experience, about the time that you really, really got it, you really, really believe, well, along comes doubt. And by the way, despite that title, Thomas was not near alone in his doubt. Mary Magdalene, the guys walking to Emmaus that I preached on Easter. Peter and John, all the other disciples who are hidden behind locked doors. There's a reason for that. Because none of them are paragons of belief. Which makes sense because belief in Easter, in resurrection, Well, that's really hard. Sometimes so much so that you're left talking about moral victories, spinning the story of Jesus in a new way that you can, kind of handle and digest. Like Jesus is a martyr. Yes, he died on that cross, but it was a moral victory. Or even spinning the resurrection itself as something really less than what resurrection actually is. Well, Jesus' spirit seemed so alive amongst the disciples when they would gather together that they said it's almost like he's still here. And they called that a resurrection, which is not at all what they were claiming. And yet all of these things are ways that we deal with doubt and try to at least make the defeat of Good Friday into a moral victory. But Thomas comes along and insists, no, he's gone. He's dead. He's sealed in a tomb. You just got to be honest in life and call a loss a loss. Disbelief, doubt. You see it again in today's gospel lesson. I don't know if you were listening real well, but Jesus comes to these disciples. I mean, he is right there in their very midst, and he speaks peace into their midst, and he shows them his scars. And then Luke says this, while in their joy, they were disbelieving and filled with wonder. I really like that because, at least for me, it's so very true. There's joy in faith. True joy, but right there beside it is doubt and wonder. And might I add, if what you call faith is not mixed with times and even seasons of doubt, and certainly a great deal of wonder, well, then what you are describing is not faith. You're describing certainty, which is far different than faith. In the church I grew up in, used to hear folks all the time say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know that Jesus lives. And I thought, really, not even a shadow of a doubt? I mean, think about that. If doubt had a shadow, they're even beyond that. I guess my body cast a bigger shadow because I've had plenty of shadows of doubt in my world and in my life. Because belief in a world such as ours is hard. Which puts me in excellent company, it turns out. Because today, precisely like last week, and really the week before on Easter, if we were listening, the gospel speaks to the doubting, Thomas-like parts of me, and I bet you as well. See, perhaps it was a bit easier to believe on Easter Sunday. Your whole family was here with you. It was a beautiful day. It was a packed church. Everything was just gorgeous in here. Everything was right. Easter seemed right there. But then you went home and made the mistake of turning on your television. Child abducted. Chemical gas attack in Syria. What we are passing off as mere politics, which is way beyond that. That Wahoos historic loss still wasn't just a bad dream. And you saw all that, and all of a sudden Easter began to seem itself a dream for fools. Of course, in our modern day, doubt is very much in vogue. Sneers are routinely thrown at faith and people of faith. And this is often seen as somehow courageous. Now, almost always what is behind all of this, I have to just call it what it is shallow historical arrogance. That is, we like to think that we are so very advanced that we're so much more, way more sophisticated than those naive, primitive, first century folk in the Bible who were so gullible about life, who were in denial about reality, who just couldn't own up to death. Of course, those people didn't have diet pills or have the audacity to call The Bachelor reality TV, which suggests we know a good bit about denial. Also didn't have a bunch of plastic, a world of facades and strip malls and strip clubs, all meaning I'm not sure that we would actually know real life or reality if it came up and slapped us in the face. The truth is, first century folks knew reality in a way, hopefully, that we never will. From devastating, unbelievably high birth mortality rates to dreadfully short lifespans, wars, famine, disease, Rome. These people knew reality, and they knew death very intimately. And because they knew all of that, they doubted. I mean, notice, there is not one doubt that's lodged by us moderns about the resurrection that wasn't first put forward by Jesus' own disciples. Doubt that the crucified Jesus, a man who claimed to be Messiah, who was put to the most gruesome, tragic, public death, had been raised from the dead. Doubt that God really somehow did continue to work, even in a Good Friday world, and come along and defeat death and evil. None of that is original with us. Jesus' first followers knew death. They knew the grave. It surrounded them. Crucifixion got that one down. But Easter? Impossible. And that's why they are in almost each and every Easter occurrence, they're hidden behind locked doors out of fear and disbelief. All of which means that if you have ever doubted, or if you just kind of find yourself struggling right now with your faith, well, you are in good company. Every single one of the apostles and disciples, the earliest leaders of the church, each and every one of them doubted too. See, doubt really isn't the question. The question is, what does Jesus do with our doubt? Well, as the gospel tells us today, what he first does is intrude. He intrudes into our settled world and our confined expectations. He just walks right in. And he walks right in, and almost always, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but he says it so much that we should pay attention. That's why I started the service with this sentence. He walks right in and he says, peace. Now this isn't, just kind of like hippie, hey man, peace. He's drawing on a theological part of his history as a Jewish person, the idea, the theology of shalom, God's peace. That God looks at this world, a world that he created to be good, and he looks at what has happened through human sin, the brokenness of it all, the fragmentation of human life, the tragedies and compromised ways that we interact with each other at best, and the gruesome realities that can accompany this world as well. And God is intent on that fragmentation, that brokenness, not having the last word. It's Isaiah's dream of a new world where there is a peaceful kingdom, where all of that brokenness is somehow put together, back together again, And that is shalom. And it overwhelms all that is wrong in the world. And even though Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again, Jesus is saying God can. And this Humpty Dumpty world of ours can be made whole. That's God's shalom. And Jesus comes and speaks that into our midst, which can sound like a pipe dream. But Jesus is intent on showing us that in him, God's somehow putting back together even the worst that this world could throw at us. Even death, the grave, even overcoming a Roman cross. The next thing that Jesus does is that he shows them his scars. I said it twice in today's gospel lesson. Did this with Thomas as well. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It sounds kind of gross, like your uncle that shows you something, some childhood scar or something that you don't want to see, and kind of freaks you out for the rest of the day. Why is he showing people his scars? What he's doing is showing that he participates with them fully in their suffering and has overcome the worst that this world could throw at us. Because think about a scar. Scar is no longer a festering wound. It was at one time, but now it's a wound that's healed enough that it doesn't hurt anymore. When I was a kid in that same church I talked about earlier, we always had special music each and every week. Somebody get up and play an instrument or usually sing a song. My mom offered this special music many weeks. And one of the songs that she would sing is the song, "Scars Are Signs of Healing." And they are. See, Jesus doesn't come with gaping, festering wounds. Those have been overcome. He comes with scars. They don't hurt him anymore. They're healed, but that pain was real and is not ignored. And might I say that scars are kind of the way forward for us too. Because God is about healing in this world and in your life, not escape. Resurrection is all about this wholeness, healing, not escape. Easter makes no sense without Good Friday. But what all of this means is that what's happened to you in your life, that matters. And it matters to God. And that when we join together week after week here, we're not just trying to blow all of that off or act like it's not real or just say, oh, we'll just have a little faith. You'll overcome it all. What we're saying is that God can take even something as bad as a cross and the wounds of Jesus and turn them into something that's healed. And that God's ability to do that in your life is more real than even your wounds. But ultimately, it is Jesus' presence that is the ultimate thing that he offers his disciples to overcome their doubts and disbelief. Although those doubts still lingered at some level, while in their joy they were disbelieving, still wondering, still somehow they could not deny this new presence in their midst. It is so easy to believe death is in control. And I don't think that that's courageous at all. That's a layup. It's easy to believe Good Friday's the end. 6 years ago, I stood on the Golan Heights one day in Israel. Beautiful area. oddly enough, kind of almost reminds you of this area. If you walk around the woods around there, which is weird from any place else in Israel. And I looked into Syria, and it was just gorgeous. It was a gorgeous day. And that evening, we drove all the way back to Jerusalem. We're at St. George's College in Jerusalem where we were staying. And I got on the computer, and I noticed that there was the beginning of the civil war happening in Syria, in the place that I just looked over into, and that Assad had murdered a bunch of his own people by shooting artillery shells into just a civilian part of a city. And somehow, in looking for more information about that, since I had just seen it, thinking about how beautiful it all was over there, I stumbled unbelievably on the worst pictures I've ever seen in my life of what that looks like when it goes into that sort of an area and hits children and babies. And I saw it all. It's easy to believe death is in control. It's not courageous. That's a layup. You know what's actually courageous in a world like ours, where that's real? It takes courage to have hope. It takes courage to have hope and be willing to allow that hope to somehow in God's time and God's way to blossom even into faith. And I'm not talking about dumb hope. I am talking about hope with your eyes wide open, seeing even that nonsense, that blasphemy against God's good world, seeing the worst that God can throw at you, coming to true terms with your scars and tragedies, and yet still believing that in the very midst of it all, God is somehow still alive. It's the only thing that makes any of this believable, by the way, that somehow, even in the tragedies of our world, Christ continues to come to us, come again and again back to us, stand in the middle of us, minister to our fears and our doubts and our wounds, offering his very presence as proof for us, sharing a table with us, speaking with us, teaching us, living with us, forever alive and risen amongst us. And that alone is what gives any of us the courage to say, Alleluia, Christ is risen. And to know that that cross was not just a moral victory. Amen.